how do organizations, when they're looking at AI, there's several different ways of using it. Is this something that, you just plug in a software into your system because you're talking about gathering data. So I would imagine you need conversational data. So calls being recorded. Zoom does that today with their call center software. They're recording the calls, and an agent's able to intelligently identify certain things that are happening during the conversation. With some technology like that takes the calls, takes the knowledge base of what's happening, and then inserts it into a script or a role play of some sort, so that the outcome is more likely to happen that you're looking for.
Well, there's a lot of barriers in implementing. Like, we're talking about a lot of really, like, AI is going to be the future, AI is going to be great. But let's talk first generally about where we are today. There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of reliability issues. I think that's the biggest one. I've tried to build different large language model applications to automate different tasks, and it's great. It works like 90% of the time. But that 10% is what causes you to make a critical mistake where all of a sudden your customers are upset, or let's say in my domain you bought the wrong product and you had a massive multi-thousand-dollar loss, right? So reliability, cost, latency, the cleanliness of your data, the talent on your team, all these things make it difficult for a business to implement this stuff. And I'm happy to also share some of the traps that I've fallen into too, if that's helpful.
Sure, because I think that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, you know, maybe we can get a little more efficient, we can get a little more lean, but you're saying, hold on there, not so fast, because you need to think about this a little bit more in a planned way, because the data may not be 100%. Like you said, you could fall into some traps, and all of a sudden you make some bets that are the wrong bets.
Well, I do want to encourage people to play around, right? I think the easiest way to play around with a use case is just give ChatGPT an example of the type of data it would be processing for, let's say, an automation task, and see how well it does. So that was my approach. I started off with just giving different examples and seeing how well it performed. But the first trap that I fell into is you end up with this really clunky output where you didn't design it. You just started with, here's some of the input that I think will be going through it, and let's try to engineer some things around our application to handle the input that we know about. It's much smarter to start with, okay, here's all the types of input that I will be getting, and here's a bunch of clean data on the right answer. When you have a big clean data set like that, then you can fine tune the prompting, you can fine tune the model, right? You can engineer for all the different types of bad input. That is a much more streamlined flow. It's much more intentional than if you just dive into it and start building. So that, I think that's one of the first traps. The other trap I think it's common for people to fall into is garbage in, garbage out. We all know you need clean data,
What
and
does that mean? 'Cause you've said it a few times now. What does clean data mean? What is that?
you're using data to train the model. And if you're teaching someone and you tell them something that's false, they're going to learn the wrong thing. People sometimes are so high level and not oriented to the detail. If you look at the actual data you're feeding your model, would you be able to interpret it? I think one of the common use cases for large language model applications is, reading the internet. And if you parse HTML data into text and you try to read it as a human, there's no paragraph spacing. Sometimes there's no periods within a sentence. Sometimes if there's a list of 10 products, those products become one big sentence. Totally uninterpretable. So how do you expect the AI to learn off of that crappy, dirty data?
Mm.